Hello everyone, with Season 8 of The Walking Dead just little under a month away, I've decided it's time to look back on the last 7 seasons of the show and rank them according to what season I feel is the best. As always with these videos, this is only my personal opinion and not some kind of official list, and as expected there will be spoilers covering the entirety of the show. Anyway, without further ado, let's begin. Season 1 to 5 and Season 7 of The Walking Dead all feature moments or entire episodes that quite frankly get on my nerves. However, in my mind no season has as many issues as Season 6 does. Continuing on from a pretty solid 5th season, the 6th season of the popular zombie franchise unfortunately proved to be a colossal disappointment. Poor pacing issues plagued the first half of the season in particular, with the decision to make Season 6A take place over one day backfiring massively. It all felt very dragged out, and as a result some of the episodes ended up being unbelievably dull. There was also that dumb Glenn fakeout, a weird time skip after episode 9 that felt out of place, and to top it all off, it included an extremely lackluster introduction to Negan, followed by an awful cliffhanger ending that nearly destroyed my enthusiasm for the show completely. Despite my negativity surrounding this entire season, there was still a decent moment or two buried in its second half. Not Tomorrow Yet is in my opinion an all-round great episode that has the distinction of sadly being caught between 15 very average ones. I have gone into much more detail regarding Season 6 in my 12 Reasons Season 6 Sucks video, so if you want to find out why I dislike this season with a passion in more detail, then I suggest you watch that video after this one finishes. After the dud that was Season 6, The Walking Dead could really only go in one direction, and while Season 7 is a definite improvement on the season that preceded it, sadly it still suffered from a lot of the same problems that plagued the show the year before. Pacing remained a key issue. Essentially the narrative of Season 7 revolved around the various communities being broken down by Negan, only to then rise up to take arms against the sadist. Whilst this doesn't actually sound that bad of an overarching storyline, it's clear that the showrunners had to stretch the content of the episodes out as much as they could. I mean, take the first half of the season for example. Rick, the show's main character, only appears in 3 episodes. 3 episodes, I can't think of another show that would sideline their key protagonist in such a way. One of my major nitpicks of Season 7 is the fact that there are far too many episodes that focus entirely on just a couple of characters or a select community. One episode we are at the Kingdom, the next we are at Sanctuary. One episode we are with Tara and Heath, another we are with Eugene and Dwight. The point I'm trying to make is that there is very little screen time when all the main characters are together and interacting with one another. And for example, if you don't particularly care about the likes of Eugene or Tara, unfortunately the show leaves you with no choice but to watch an entire episode centred on them. I would much rather The Walking Dead transition from one community to another in a single episode, rather than take 3 or 4 episodes just to check in on everyone. Going back to what I just mentioned regarding pacing, I'm sure that the reason why the showrunners decided to introduce the Junkyard people was just to add a bit of extra content to the season. These bowl cut weirdos aren't in the comics, and in my mind are one of the worst original additions to the TV show universe. I am fully confident that if The Walking Dead featured a lesser amount of episodes every season, they wouldn't exist and the show would be much better for it. Finally, I feel like the deaths of Glenn and Abe have still cast a large shadow over the show. Glenn and Abe were both very likeable characters, and with their passing The Walking Dead has attempted to put more emphasis on certain side characters in order to fill the void left by them. The problem is that it just doesn't matter how much screen time you give to characters like Enid, Rosita and Tara, they just aren't that interesting to watch. And sadly it seems that the show is running out of genuine characters who I actually give a crap about. Even though I feel that Season 7 was pretty average at best, there were still some decent moments. I would say that Negan was arguably the glue holding the show together. Although there are still things that annoy me about him, you can't argue that he doesn't make for interesting viewing. Furthermore, Stephen Og Simon, one of Negan's henchmen, was one of the best new characters to be introduced on the show, and at times I actually found him to be more intense and intimidating than his boss. Moving on, I know I just moaned a moment ago about Season 7 having too many episodes focusing entirely on a couple of characters. However, I do feel that for some characters they actually benefited from the extra screen time afforded to them. Eugene and Dwight in particular are 2 characters who I feel became a lot more interesting to watch due to their continued character development. I know I'm probably in the minority as the pair of them aren't particularly popular with most of the fanbase, but I did enjoy watching their contrasting storylines. It was interesting to see Eugene grow fonder of Negan as the episodes progressed, as well as witness Dwight's increasing resentment of the Saviour's leader as the season moved forward. All in all, Season 7 wasn't a total disaster, but for me it was a very average 16 episodes of The Walking Dead. The second season of The Walking Dead is probably one of the most divisive amongst fans. While some enjoyed the farmyard setting and the time taken for extra character development, others found the season to be too drawn out and slow, especially when you compare it to the breakneck pace of the first season of the show. I do understand the criticism, and at times I am inclined to agree that the pacing was once again an issue. However, for the most part I feel that Season 2 is a pretty decent if unremarkable chapter of the franchise. I think one of the second season's biggest redeeming qualities is that the majority of the characters whom the show focuses on are all interesting and likeable, much more so than characters introduced in later seasons. Being able to spend more time with the likes of Glenn, Maggie and Daryl allowed viewers to learn more about the characters who would go on to become a key part of the show. Seeing Daryl have a more caring side as he comforted Carol while searching for Sophia is a great example of some very good character development. In the first season he was just some mouthy redneck who quite frankly we knew very little about. Season 2 allowed us to learn more about him as a person, which ultimately made him more appealing. The same thing happened to a lot of the other characters as well. Furthermore, I loved how the show handled Shane and Rick's deteriorating relationship. The build up to Shane's death wasn't rushed like in the comics. Instead, the show expertly portrayed Shane's descent into villainy with acts such as killing Otis, threatening Dale, fighting Rick at the school and finally killing Randall. It genuinely felt that we were watching a guy overcome with jealousy losing his mind, and this all culminated into a frantic climax in which Rick had to kill his old best friend. I also really enjoyed the season finale, which in my mind did go a long way to helping to make up for the lack of action during the rest of the season. Finally, although I am in agreement with those who say the Sophia arc was overlong, you can't argue that the outcome wasn't brilliantly done. Having the group slaughter all the walkers Herschel had hiding in his barn, only to then see little Sophia walk out, was a major emotional gut punch, and a great payoff for what was at times quite a boring quest to find her. Season 6 has its problems for sure, but it also does a lot right. I had a lot of difficulty deciding where to put Season 5 on this list due to my differing opinions on each half of the season. The first half I absolutely loved, but the second half unfortunately I found to be a bit dull. I'll start with what I liked about the season first, and it would be crazy for me not to talk about the fantastic season opener, No Sanctuary. This installment remains one of my favourite episodes to date of The Walking Dead. Gareth and his group of cannibals were a really messed up group, and I remember the shock I felt when seeing them slice their captives' throats open over a bathtub. It was a truly disturbing moment, which of course then set up a fantastic return for Carol, who saved the group just in the nick of time. Although I love this episode, I have come across many people who have complained that they felt like the group broke out of Terminus far too quickly and wish they had stayed there for just a bit longer. I think the showrunners handled this story arc really well, and I would much rather have one fantastic full throttle episode set in Terminus than 4 or 5 average ones that had been stretched thin for content. In the next episode we got the classic tainted meat moment from the comic, albeit with a different character on the receiving end, and Gareth would meet his end in the 3rd episode of the season, 4 Walls on a Roof, in a brutal manner befitting of someone so disgusting. Overall, the season got off to a pretty damn good start. However, I do have one major gripe with the first half of the season, and as you can probably all guess, my problem lies with the Grady Memorial arc. To me, this entire storyline just seemed really forced and pointless. I mean, why go through all the trouble in having Beth be kidnapped, reveal where she is, only to then just have her die in an incredibly dumb fashion? The argument could be that at least it gave us a new character in Noah, but it's not like he lasted long on the show anyway. I did like the episodes in between the Grady arc, and I'll admit I did enjoy seeing Rick and his group force their way into the hospital in episode 8, however in my mind this story arc will just go down as another average original plot conjured up by the showrunners. The second half of the season however is where I feel things really began to go downhill. I already mentioned in my last video how much I hate the episode What Happened and What's Going On with a passion. To me it's just 45 minutes of watching Tyrese, a character who I don't particularly care about, dying in a room having hallucinations. Let's just say I won't be watching it any time again in a hurry. The next episode isn't much better as it just features the group walking, and walking, and walking some more. Things do get better with the introduction of Aaron, and it does make for intriguing viewing seeing the caveman like Rick attempting to fit in Alexandra. I also loved the moment when Daryl shoots an animal dead on arrival and said that he has brought dinner, much to the shock of the scumbag Nicholas. I can't really say that I'm a huge fan of all the episodes set in Alexandria, due to the fact that it did feel at times that the pacing slowed to an absolute crawl. I mean, look at this Wikipedia summary for episode 13. Though Rick's group is welcome to the community, Rick, Daryl and Carol meet privately to discuss how to recover and stash their weapons from the Alexandria Armory as backup plans should they need to exert control. That's it, the entire episode is about some people talking about making a plan. Yeah, not exactly the most exciting hour of television. The final 2 episodes, however, make up for much of the second half of the season, and help provide a fantastic conclusion. I love how Rick completely goes batshit crazy during episode 15 Try, and as a viewer I actually felt a mixture of disappointment and embarrassment for Rick in seeing this strong leader who I had followed for so long reduced to the rambling village lunatic. Finally, the season finale that followed did a superb job of portraying the community's growing distrust of Rick, and the ending in which he kills Pete in front of the town, only for Morgan to arrive just in time to see the aftermath, still sticks out in my mind as a great ending to a season. Even now I'm debating if I should place this season higher or lower on this list. The issue I have is that when season 5 is good, it's really good, but when it's bad it can be pretty dire. It's a real hit and miss season that in my mind contains some of the show's best moments as well as some of its worst. I described just a moment ago how much I loved season 5 opener No Sanctuary, however I can't say the same at all for season 4 premiere 30 Days Without an Accident. I came into this episode expecting some kind of continuation from the Governor storyline in season 3, but instead I was greeted with Rick talking to some weird Irish lady for some reason. The whole thing seemed really out of place, and in fact I disliked this episode so much that it actually took me a couple of months to continue watching the show. It's a good thing that I didn't give up with The Walking Dead, as the episodes that preceded the premiere were much better. The majority of the first half of the season focused on the TV original Flu story arc. Anyone who has watched my videos will know that when it comes to the TV original storylines, I'm not really a fan of most of them. However, the Flu arc is an exception, as I feel it was very cleverly done and made for some extremely tense and nail-biting viewing. Yes, it was a bit convenient that the governor decided to launch an attack on the prison just as everyone had recovered from the virus. I mean, if he had attacked a couple of weeks earlier, surely he would have brought the entire prison down, but I'll let that slide. I feel that Herschel was arguably the standout character during this arc, and I always remember him bravely putting others before himself as he attempted to cure as many people as possible. The 2 flashback governor episodes that followed did a great job of examining his character and helped set up a brilliant mid-season finale. I do have one minor complaint regarding the governor's final attack on the prison though, that being that I've always found it a bit dumb that the governor could lose all his people from an entire community and then suddenly recruit a group of random people to take arms for him. It just doesn't make any sense. I much prefer the comic version in which the governor fails on his first attack on the prison and then simply waits until he deems it the right moment to strike. It seems more plausible to me than having him create another army from scratch. Anyway, whether you agree or disagree with me on this, the governor's final attack on the prison was expertly handled. The episode 2 Far Gone had a bit of everything. A fantastic speech from Rick, one very emotional death and some badass action scenes. I mean, who doesn't love seeing Daryl throw a grenade into a tank whilst killing some dudes with his crossbow? In my mind, the second half of season 4, although not as good as the first, still had some very high quality standout moments. Carol killing Lizzie, Rick, Daryl, Carl and Michonne coming up against the Claimers, and finally the fantastic ending with the reunited group trapped in Terminus. These examples help season 4 become one of the best chapters of the Walking Dead franchise. The second entry on this list is where it all started, season 1. In a way, perhaps season 1 does have an unfair advantage when it comes to this list, as I'm judging the quality over 6 episodes instead of the 16 that most of the other seasons had. However, I'm only working with what I have available, and when judging the season on its own merit, I feel it deserves to take second spot. The first episode of The Walking Dead is a masterpiece. It wonderfully adapts the comic book and provides a fantastic introduction to the world. As good as Andrew Lincoln is as Rick, I feel that Lenny James's Morgan puts in a great performance and actually steals his spotlight somewhat. I think many viewers agree with me, as he became a real fan favourite after his initial appearance, despite not showing up in another episode for 2 seasons. Anyway, getting back to the topic at hand, the introduction to the world of The Walking Dead goes from strength to strength. As a viewer, we feel Rick's agonising pain when he goes to his family home to find it empty, and it really does feel like the poor sheriff has awoken from his coma into some kind of nightmare. The scene is wonderfully set, and as a first episode I'm not really sure what else the creative team behind it could have done to make it any better. The season carries on with episodes at an incredibly high standard. I'm sure that even after all these years, everyone will remember the second episode, Guts, with its nerve-wracking sequence in which Rick and Glenn tried to stealthily make their way past a group of walkers before the rain washed off the titular Guts that had allowed them to blend into the undead. Many fantastic and interesting to watch characters are introduced over the 6 episodes. Sure, some of them may be arseholes like Merle and Shane, but that doesn't mean they didn't make for captivating viewing. I've mentioned previously how highly I rated the Flu arc as an original story. Well, the episode Vatos is another deviation from the comics that is handled tremendously. The twist that the group is actually caring for the elderly is a really clever turnaround that I didn't see coming. It's also a surprisingly optimistic and heartwarming moment in what can be quite a depressing show. My only complaint with the season as a whole revolves around some of the strange decisions by the showrunners at the time that no longer really fit in with the Walking Dead continuity. Firstly, the walkers in this said season seem to be a lot more intelligent than those we see later. For instance, we see Morgan's dead wife trying to open the door to her house. There is no way a walker should be doing this. They simply aren't smart enough to equate a doorknob with opening a door. Instead, they would just use brute force to try and break the door down. Secondly, I don't really know what the creative team were thinking when they decided to make Jim have a dream about group members dying, causing him to go into a frenzy and dig some mass graves. It's like they were going for this kind of supernatural vibe which has never really been touched on since. Finally, the last episode of the season, TS19, to me feels so out of place with the rest of the show. The whole government secret facility thing feels like something out of Resident Evil and not The Walking Dead, and to me it seemed to only be included so there could be some kind of big explosive set piece at the end of the season. Despite these flaws, it's impossible not to see the quality on show during the opening season. Perhaps it could be argued that I enjoy the first season more than most of the others, because instead of containing 13 to 16 episodes of varying quality, it's made up of 6 fast-paced, exciting installments, making it more easier to watch than the longer exposition-heavy seasons that followed. Regardless of whether this is correct or not, I still think that the show's initial season is of fantastic quality and is a great debut for the popular zombie franchise. My number 1 spot on this list goes to the fantastic 3rd season of the show. Personally, I feel that season 3 is when the show was at its most consistent in terms of quality. All 16 episodes are enjoyable to watch, and even though of course there are some installments that are better than others, there aren't any standout terrible episodes. My high praise of season 3 is certainly helped by the fact that it gets off to a flying start, with an exhilarating first episode in which Rick's group storm the prison. I loved seeing Rick and Co so confident in their abilities and being so full of belief that they could make the place their own. The story arc that follows with the prisoners also makes for some great viewing. I especially enjoyed witnessing Rick's transformation from the nice guy he was portrayed as during the first 2 seasons to a guy who without hesitation puts a machete through a man's head. It's a sign of things to come for his character, and I love how the Rictator took care of the prisoners he encountered. The 3rd episode of the season introduced the audience to the Governor and also reunited viewers with Andrea and Merle. I feel that the Governor is handled expertly throughout his time on the show, and I think it's a very clever decision by the show's creative team to have Andrea spend some time with him at Woodbury so audiences could better learn about him. He's a great villain and is one of the reasons season 3 is so enjoyable to watch. I also feel like Merle is an incredibly underrated character in the Walking Dead universe. The interactions between him and his little brother Daryl really add some heart to the show, and as shown when Merle converses with Herschel about verses found in the Bible, there's more to his character than we are initially led to believe. His redemption, which ultimately leads to his death, is just one of the great plot lines on display during the season. The 4th episode, Killer Within, is perhaps one of the most shocking in the Walking Dead franchise. Not only does T-Dog bite the dust protecting Carol, Rick also loses his wife Lori. I know that the scene of Rick crying on the floor is now weirdly synonymous with a bad joke meme, but I feel that in terms of the show it's an iconic moment. What still stands out to me today is the fact that the showrunners had the balls to kill off 2 major characters in the 4th episode of the season. Now it seems big characters only die in season premieres and finales, and to be honest it's all getting a bit predictable. Having Lori and T-Dog die in the same episode genuinely shocked me upon viewing. The next 4 episodes cleverly build up the tension between Woodbury and the prison, which would eventually lead to the 2 coming to blows with one another. There's a lot of great moments to be found in these episodes, such as Rick talking to an imaginary Lori on the phone, Glenn fighting his way out of the Governor's interrogation room, and Daryl and Merle coming face to face for the first time since the opening season. The second half of Season 8 carries on the momentum of the first, with many exciting episodes thrown into the mix. Despite there being some fantastic action sequences throughout the entirety of the season, some of the quieter moments also pack quite a punch. The thing I believe Season 3 does better than any other of The Walking Dead is for the most part it gets the pacing spot on. Having episodes like Clear and Arrow on the doorpost in between some of the more action-centric episodes gives the viewers a chance to catch their breath. It also helps that these slower paced episodes are also interesting in their own right. For example, I think that Clear, although a more simple and reserved entry, is one of the highlights of the season. There are of course a few things that I dislike about Season 3, such as the fact that I never found myself caring for Andrea at all, and I also thought that Rick seeing hallucinations of an angelic Lori was incredibly dumb and cliche. However, on the whole I have very little to complain about, and as you all probably know, I tend to complain quite a lot. Simply put, if I was given the choice of only watching one season of The Walking Dead ever again, I'd pick Season 3. For me, it gets the pacing right, has some great story arcs, and is filled with some very watchable and intriguing characters. For me, this is the best The Walking Dead has ever been. So there you go, there is my ranking of Season 1 to 7 of The Walking Dead. Please let me know your thoughts below, perhaps you agree with some of my choices, perhaps you don't. And as always, thank you very much for watching, and until next time, goodbye.